Welcome again to American Zarathustra, episode 7 of Imperium Art. We're very, very excited today to have on a British author, Richard Nichols, author of Lost Causes, which you can get on Kindle. Please click the link below the video to get your copy. Let's say hello to Richard. How are you doing today, sir?
All good, thanks, guys. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
And also, I'm very happy to have my friend and co-host Nullis, who hosts the Sunday evening show on White Art Collective, Conversations with the Wind. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. Thank you very much. And hello to Richard and hello to the audience.
Fabulous. So, Richard, you have a very unique and fascinating background. Let's let people get to know you a little bit before we discuss your book and your thoughts on Imperium art. So, for starters, I understand you were born in Jamaica. Is that correct?
That is correct. My dad was sent out there when it was part of the British Empire colony. We were colonizers, a minority in a country with a different majority, so the kind of reverse of what the situation is now.
Yeah.
Although I left when I was very young, I left when I was 3.5 and I went to school there, it did have quite a big impact. Jamaica was a paradise to grow up in, and to go to 1970s Britain from this tropical paradise was quite a shock even at that age.
I can imagine. What was it like then at the time when you went back to Britain? How is it different then from today?
Well, it was in an economic depression that it entered in the early 70s and didn't get out of until really the late 80s, after the Thatcherite, in inverted commas, revolution. And certainly it was a shock factor that I can still remember. I was sick for a long time and stuff. And I mention it because it possibly, thinking on these things, affected the way I looked at Britain. If I had been brought up and born in Britain, I presume I would have seen a different Britain to the one I saw. And I think it's a benefit to have this sort of outside origin, external origin to a place.
I would agree. You know, Nullis and I both have lived out of the United States for some time, and I feel that the three of us have a unique perspective on our own cultures then in that regard.
Yeah.
And I would even encourage people to do some traveling.
Yeah.
Now, on that topic, you've done some travel writing as well, correct?
I have. Much later on, I was at a loose end. I've been a businessman, and coming out of a successful business venture, I had some money in the bank and some time on my hands and nothing else pressing, no family or commitments. So that was when I started considering the novel as a way to go next, and to get some experience and to keep the bank balance topped up. I did some travel writing for about 2 years. Nothing too serious, well-recognized travel books, but nothing that you particularly.
So how did you get into writing in the novel format then?
Well, I'll go back to the beginning. Leaving when I was in England as a youth, I had the good luck of growing up in the village that Roald Dahl, the famous novelist, lived in.
Wow.
I became a good friend of his children and spent 5 years pretty much in and out of his house. And early on, at the age of 10, I guess, it occurred to me, this guy, whoever he was, because I didn't really know who he was then, but he had a great life. He didn't have to go to work. He did a couple of hours a day. He was world famous, very wealthy, and it occurred to me early on that if ever I had the chance, writing would be a suitable career. So that's where the seeds were sown. But the real reason for writing was a frustration. Came many years later when I was in my teens, through the late 20s, where I felt I had to say something. Well, I had to do something about the way the country was going. Great Britain was entering a downward spiral. It was pretty clear to me, not to everybody, but to me. And I felt very frustrated. I felt you couldn't join the army. Like in the old days, if this sort of situation had arisen, you'd have joined the army and been sent off to shoot the enemy. And there was no army to join as such. There was an enemy that you could point at.
Yeah.
The obvious solution was politics, and I put my toe in the water, my little toe, just to test it.
Yeah.
And very quickly realized that the so-called conservatives, which are like your Republicans, were rhinos or kind of CEOs.
Or Democrat light, as I like to call them.
Yep. And they were disgusting people. They had awful personal qualities, histories. If you looked into it, I won't go into it now. And it repulsed me. It literally, I fled out of it. It was quite obvious that unless you ticked a few boxes that I was never going to tick, you were going nowhere.
Wow.
And it left me in a bit of a quandary. How can I contribute? I had a bit of time, I had a bit of money, and I wanted to put my shoulder to the whatever wheel I could.
Yeah.
So then the book idea came up to me. It coincided with what I could see as a decline in something that had been important to me up to then, which was the James Bond phenomena, the Ian Fleming's works. They were being abused in the cinema. I could see the plot lines were falling apart. It just wasn't carrying its weight anymore, and I could see that it was going to get worse, which it has. And I thought, well, I will try and fill in that vacuum of the James Bond thriller style thing for British youth aged the same as the Bond market, sort of 14 to 35. But I will put some politics into it, and it will be a vehicle for me to penetrate some of these young men's minds, hopefully, and feed, not completely convince them or change them or anything, but at least show them that there was an alternative view to the prevailing orthodoxy of the time, which...
And I think James Bond is one of the greatest kind of male archetypes, specifically British archetypes as well, as far as that, masculine archetype, some kind of a role of a vision of an alpha male from an age that obviously no longer is, but it's an exciting and empowering character, or a myth, if you will. So it's really great to hear that you're kind of doing something with that.
Yes, I think it's a very important vacuum. Well, if we cede that position, which is happening, I don't know if you've been following the latest shenanigans with the latest Bond film, but it's basically going to be a woke feminist.
I think it's like a black feminist is now James Bond, something absurd like that. I'm sorry, whenever that kind of thing happens, it's simply not James Bond. It's just, you can tear a label off of something and put it on something else, and nobody believes that it is what it says it is. So I think of that as absurd, but that's just my approach.
Yeah, it is absurd. It's also very funny sometimes, but it's also very serious because without these cultural icons and archetypes that you talk about, the next generation have nobody to grasp or idealize.
I think it also emboldens our enemies too. It gives them permission to steal our culture and our history, and that's deeply offensive and wrong.
Of course, if someone in England puts on a Mexican hat, it's cultural appropriation.
Appropriation, yeah.
But you can steal the whole genre of Shakespeare and change it all you want, and no one.
Just today I saw a report about white people shouldn't speak second languages because that's cultural appropriation. I mean, it's just, there's no bottom to the lunacy of the left. But anyway, I don't mean to keep interrupting you.
No, not at all. So basically, I combined the Bond template, let's call it, the sort of format, with a pinch of sort of old-fashioned masculinity from other generations, plus a bit of the... Ayn Rand had been an influence in my early adulthood, and I have strong differences with her today, but she was a a drug, what do they call it, a gateway drug.
Okay, yeah. I think a lot of people could say the same in the dissident right.
But I did appreciate how she was one of the few people who had successfully blended politics with literature and made an impact, along with very few others. Orwell's done it and a few others, but you can count them on one hand, basically.
Right, right.
And I sort of spliced in a bit of her technique when it comes to the reveal at the end of the book and stuff like that.
Nice.
Well, I hope so.
Wonderful, wonderful. There's, I guess before we move on about your book, I am kind of curious what was it about Ayn Rand that really appealed to you when you were young, as a young man?
One thing was simply that she was probably the only voice out there that you could relatively easily find or access. And even then, it wasn't easy in England because she wasn't on sale, but you could get the books, and there just wasn't anyone else. With an empty. It hasn't changed much, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book. Nobody's filled her boots since the 50s.
I guess I would venture to say that maybe there are authors and voices out there, but they don't seem to get a big platform, or they're not well known. And this is part of why we would like to, give you a little spotlight in our small world here.
Yeah, it's much appreciated. No, I think that's the problem. I mean, even then there were probably other authors around, but it just wasn't, the internet wasn't there, and you just didn't know who they were or where they were. She was a symbol, or a bulwark in a sense. You could hold her book on a train. I mean, I would often hold her book on a train and feel a sense of the revolutionary in me coming out, because just by holding it, sort of talisman against everything else. Now, obviously, since then I've developed differences, but at the time, what also appealed to me was the great role heroes play in her works. She had that dead right. She had aspects of the free market right and how government destroys or can destroy, which you can argue the pros and cons more.
Right.
Yeah, there were certainly definite key elements that were attractive.
So I guess this leads beautifully right into your book, Lost Causes. Actually, I feel Nullis is the expert here. He's the great writer among us, and me and him. So, and he's got some fantastic questions lined up for you. Nullis, would you like to take the wheel?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Richard. And so I basically wanted to first qualify that I haven't had the opportunity to read the entire book. I'm a little bit beyond the midway point.
Okay.
But I also want to make sure that I avoid revealing any spoilers, because your book is an excellent novel. So I'm going to try to approach some comments more from a general point of view, as opposed to specific let's say plot or character development related stuff, and because I'd like to really encourage the audience to order your book, read your book, because it's that good, and I seriously believe that. So I would say that my overall impression that this is obviously a very British spy novel, and the style of writing is very fluid. It's very easy to read, but it's not oversimplified. So it gives excellent descriptions. It perfectly captures the mindset of the era in which you're writing, which a lot of times people don't do that. They don't do their research, or they don't know enough about the subject matter they're writing about, and then they wind up writing a lot of nonsense. But you perfectly captured this mindset of the era. In addition to that, the military and the agency-related terms to me feel realistic. I don't know if those are accurate terms or not, but it worked very well in what I was reading. It felt very natural and organic as a part of the story. And so I'm also going to be careful not to ask you how you know so much. I'm just kidding. But it's really well written in terms of explaining the different relationships between the agencies and all the different military units that are involved. The plot itself, I think, is superbly set up with a strong ticking clock in the beginning of the story. So I found that when you start reading the book, you know right away that there's something that you have to read. You have to continue because you have to find out what's going on here. What's the big mystery? And it's also interestingly connected with, let's just say, transatlantic implications, which is also very mysterious and interesting. So it makes it a very good read in that sense as well. So you're feeling, that you're taking it takes you out of where you are, and it puts you in the locations perfectly.
Right.
And that to me is always a very important aspect of any kind of art, whether it's written literature, whether it's music, or even paintings or any sculptures or what have you. If it can pull me out of where I am and place me into that particular moment that I'm reading or watching or listening, then I know this is a good work. And you've done that, I think. The personal relationships and the connections between the relationships, which is also very interesting, is well developed and compelling. For me, none of this feels contrived for the sake of the plot, because a lot of times you'll have a lot of plot devices stuck in there just to keep the plot going. But I think that you've set up the characters very well. The structure is very solid. And I can visualize each person that you describe in your book. So that to me is always very important. Which kind of, on a side note, more out of curiosity, because I've been thinking about who could play these characters in a movie. So have you thought about that by any chance?
I have, but I am not very fluent with the modern Hollywood sort of thing, so I'm not very familiar with it. So I don't really have many ideas on that subject. I would like to see an outsider. I don't want to see, if it ever goes to the films, I don't want to see they're just an ugly bunch to me, the whole Hollywood setup, man. Anyone who's made it thus far, you can guarantee they're not the kind of person I would want to share a beer with. So I'm kind of hoping it'll be an ex-rugby player or somebody who's beaten up in life and plays the role with a bit of authenticity rather than too much stylized stunts and all that.
Right.
But
so more. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it really. That's my position.
Yeah. So I can picture that. I've been sort of thinking about it too as I'm reading it, but I'll leave it up to the audience. Again, I encourage everyone to read this novel, because I think it's an excellent novel that's worth our time. And what I also like, by the way, is how you wove in themes of World War I into your story. And so for many of us, World War I has a profound, lasting impact on both our relationship with each other in, let's just say, in Europe and in the overall diaspora, and also the way we view our history. So I thought that was a very nice touch, that you brought in elements of World War I, and also sort of bringing that traditional element. But I'll get to that in a moment.
Okay.
Another side note I just wanted to mention is that it seems that you're quite well versed as it relates to things of fashion and style. So no. because I'm trying to talk Donald into maybe having a panel discussion on what, fashion and style within the Imperium art context, what that would mean.
Right.
We can certainly do that. And as I mentioned in an email, Kai Moros is actually quite outspoken on that topic. And so we'll have to entice him somehow to get on the show.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're interested, let's circle back to this at some point. But at least you describe things very well. So that's all I want to say. So let me jump to the first question that I really have. So why did you choose the name of the Scottish novelist and politician, John Buchan, and I hope I'm pronouncing this properly, for the main character? Why that name?
It's pronounced Buchan.
Buchan.
He was the first thriller writer of full stop. He wrote the first thrillers. Some people say Edgar Allan Poe, but really the first thrillers were written by John Buchan in the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. he was also very sound in a political sense. And he's now gone out of favor because, guess what? He's an old white man who's not left-wing. And I feel his works deserve to be kept in the public eye somewhat. They're not perfect, but they did two things. They introduced thrillers with from a sort of right of centre perspective. He also made this wonderful quote. He was a fantastic individual. He wrote hundreds of books on history and all sorts, and they're all well worth reading on their own merits. In one book on a Scottish revolutionary, he talks about how lost causes are never really lost, and as long as there are people willing to fight them, and as long as the creed, he calls it, gets restated, that the mythos or whatever gets repeated for the next generation, because otherwise they do become lost causes. They literally go down the rabbit hole and get forgotten. So I felt I owed him a debt, and I like the name Buchan. It's short for buccaneer, if you like.
Yeah.
And it also, the JB, if you look at a lot of successful thrillers, the lead character is Jack Bauer, James Bond, Jason Bourne, and I quite like the idea of following in that trajectory. Maybe it'll bring you luck.
Well, that was very convenient, I guess, right? If you add all of these different elements together.
Indeed, yes, it was. And there's even another one, but I'm saving that for the next novel, so I'll keep that a secret. There's another dimension that'll come in.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that was going to be a question, but I was remiss to ask that question before. But I think that now you've revealed it, that there will be a sequel to this novel.
Yes, it's part one of the way I interpret the political scene and our enemies in inverted comma. There are two groups involved, and we're in a pincer movement from the top and from the bottom. And this book deals with the bottom half, not the top half so much. And they're the foot soldiers, they're the useful idiots, they are the ones that we're seeing on the streets at the moment. They're the ones that vote against our interests and against their own interests. And it's a fantastic phenomenon to see huge swathes of the population. I live, up in Britain, sophisticated first world country, great education, best universities, and you talk to people and realise that you might as well be talking to a plank. They've learned nothing of consequence. They're repeating slogans. And how did this? It's fascinating. How did such huge quantities of people fall so systematically to such an obvious fraud? And
yep.
That was the goal of the first novel, is to deal with them. There wasn't room to deal with the other half, but that may well develop later on. We'll see.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, because this is definitely something that I will encourage everyone. Again, read this novel, and we'll put some pressure on you to get that second one out sooner.
Yes.
And don't forget, the link is below the video if you'd like to grab it on Kindle too.
But you make an interesting observation, incidentally, about a lot of people who have, at least on paper, excellent credentials, academic credentials, yet when you speak with them, they're as boring as a plank, as numb and completely clueless to what's going on around them. They're not critical thinkers. They think critically, but about the wrong things.
Exactly.
And so I'm very familiar with these people. And sadly, the problem is that the academic circles also promote this, and I have a whole litany of criticism against modern academia. That's another topic. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's very similar. Germans have a very fitting phrase. It's called the Fachidiot, which is basically the subject idiot.
Right.
So they're excellent in one particular aspect of a subject, But if you take them out of that box, then they're completely inept, and that you see that quite often, more and more in the burgeoning technocratic classes that have been evolving over the last 30 years, 30 plus years even. And and this again, the so-called technocratic class is also another interesting topic, which would be more of a social commentary as opposed to a cultural one. Nevertheless, it's an important topic that I think one day we'll try to see how we can cover that. So that's all very, very relevant. And I like the name. I didn't pronounce it properly, but reading it, I liked it. I like that you chose the a novelist, a thriller novelist, a politician, someone that has a background. So I found that to be very interesting. I didn't realize the initial JB, but that to me is also an added bonus, sort of a cherry on the top of the ice cream, so to speak.
Yeah, I would point out, just in closing on that, that he's also symbolic of a generation that I think was probably the last generation of well, the natural, true-born British individual type, gentleman type. The World War definitely decimated their ranks, and by the end of the Second World War, they were pretty much a spent force. So he's a symbol of that as well. He's and although I've picked him out, everybody in his generation thought the same. He just happens to be the guy that put it into words in his novels. But in that sense, he's symbolic of a much bigger crowd, not just an individual.
Oh yeah, I have to add to that. I mean, my first episode on Conversations with the Wind dealt with World War I trench poets, among others, and I selected several British trench poets, also a German trench poet and a Hungarian trench poet, and each one of them, basically, they all reflected the same sentiment. And my after doing my research for that episode, my impression was that we lost a lot more than we realize through that war.
Yes, we did, sadly.
I think that war destroyed not just one, but maybe even two generations of our best and brightest and most talented. And I think that had that generation not been decimated the way it was, we might have a slightly different world today. But again, one could argue many different ways. I think that this is interesting, definitely, and I share the sentiment. So definitely share this sentiment with you. Let me jump to the next question, which is, how would you compare your character? So John Buchan or Buchan, I guess, to characters like Fleming's James Bond, or even Le Carré's George Smiley. I mean, both of them are much different types of archetypes, much different character types. So how would you compare yours to the other two?
Smiley is easier to dismiss. I'm not a fan of Le Carré. He also lived in the same village as Roald Dahl, funnily enough. I didn't know him, but he came from there. Carré, I think, was a symptom of the modern era. He still is. He's revealed his colours now. I mean, his novels now are jokes. They're all about polluting the planet and feminism and stuff. Whereas it was better hidden in his earlier novels, but it was still present, this sense that of nihilism, of no pride in fighting for your country, that one guy was as good or bad as the other. You couldn't trust anyone within your infrastructure. And that there was nothing really, there were just pieces on a board, and who cared who really came out on top. Yeah. So I'm slightly a reaction to him, and I didn't like the fact that I have to say, he wrote some excellent novels, and in their own merit, they're quite fascinating works, but I didn't like the ultimate message or what he was doing. I felt soiled by him, by enjoying his works. And with Fleming, it was a lot more clear-cut. I admired and respected, and as I say, I really felt that we were losing something valuable, in the same sense as if we burned all the great masters. We would be losing something valuable. With Fleming, that's exactly what's happening. It's happening in a different way. It's being diluted and eliminated through stealth. But sooner or later, it won't be long before. Well, the new films are already a woke joke, and the old ones will soon be banned because, you know, goodness knows, he must have been racist or sexist or something along the way, which he was.
Oh, yeah.
And it won't be long before James Bond is gone. So I wanted a modern version. I wanted him to be tougher than James Bond. The suave, I think the era of the suave, sophisticated sort of lover may have existed then. I don't know if it really did, but it certainly passed in terms of how our audience, or my audience, has to see themselves. We're not going to win this by wearing tuxedos at balls or, you know, dinner parties and stuff. It's going to have to be the rougher side of James Bond. So I've made him, you know, I've eliminated the gadgets, the fancy stuff, the fast cars, to an extent, the lovers. There's still a feminine, there's a few female roles in my book, but I wanted him to be much more tough, down to earth, brusque, ready with his fists, and I think that's really what we, you know, as a group, as people today need to be thinking, rather than along those lines, rather than.
Yep. Well, also, yeah, I mean, back in the day, it was a different world as well. You had more a Cold War mentality. It was not really a hot war as much, and it wasn't as, so you had room for the kind of suave, sophisticated spy because of the environment, the cultural environment, the political environment that we were in back in the day. Because back then it was easier to portray them that way, as opposed to a more raw and honest portrayal of what it's like to be someone like James Bond. I think that, but again, we have to put aside, and I think for the audience's sake, we're not talking about a nihilist hero here. We are talking about an anti-hero, but I wouldn't call, at least so far as what I've read, this is not a nihilist hero.
No, not at all. He's not, quite the opposite, hopefully.
And that's important because, you know, nowadays when you talk about a rough, raw character, they say, you know, using the quotation marks, real character, then it tends to be a nihilist with a lot of personal issues, which is okay to have. I mean, you need to have a compelling character that overcomes their own personal demons and obstacles. But and this is where maybe it's and I'm going to segue to the next question, which is, in your opinion, what's the what significance does the anti-hero play in our current cultural milieu, especially as it relates to the European man? So how would you feel that your anti-hero, or an anti-hero in general?
You're referring to Buchan here?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Well, I wanted him to be a role model. This is, you know, the old-fashioned hero figure for the young guy who lives in, you know, a suburb of London, say, who's confused because everywhere he goes, feminine men are promoted and extolled as virtuous, and there's no masculine heroes anymore. Even the sort of sports heroes are kneeling and long-haired and, you know, generally debauched, and the pop heroes are terrible, and there's no one out there in Hollywood. Hollywood's not providing the John Waynes anymore, hardly. I mean, occasional film. And I wanted to provide the antipathy of what we see around us, really, without any shame, guilt, or sense of arrogance. You know, it's just a natural state of man to be like Buchan, but unfortunately you wouldn't know that. If you were an alien landing on Earth today, you'd think the ideal man was, you know, quite the opposite of him. So he's really there as a role model, and I put him through all the trials and tribulations that all classical heroes go through. He gets tortured, knocked out dozens of times, beaten. But he has to come through. He has to gird his loins. He has to stick with it. So that's what he's for. His role is to present to young, confused, largely, mostly confused people, an alternative to what they're being fed non-stop.
Excellent. And I just realized something. If Mel Gibson is listening to this episode, he should get in touch with us.
I'd love to play a role in it too. So
he's one of the few that you can point to with any confidence as we get it. That's right.
So just, we're putting it out there in the ether. So if by some miracle he does hear this call, just get in touch with any one of us.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So let's just jump to the next question. What influenced your decision to write this book? I mean, and what I mean by not necessarily just the impetus, but why a thriller? And was there a specific event or experience that you would like to share relating to the particular storytelling that you're presenting?
A thriller because they sell well. There's no point, and this goes to all of us in this end of the spectrum, few of us there are, but there's absolutely no point in wasting time dedicating your work to a tiny niche. We need to go big. We need to be a household word. We need to be widely acknowledged for our work, whether we want to or not. And I'm not particularly inclined to be well known, but I feel that it's a barrier we have to break. Otherwise, we will remain stuck in our little corner while the rest of the world basically goes to hell. So a thriller is much more likely to sell in large numbers for males. I was targeting young males than say a love story or any kind, any other kind of type of novel. Men don't read very much in general. Young men definitely don't, as the new generation. It has to be appealing to them. It has to be something that they, like you, hopefully, when you said you opened it and you get the feeling, I need to keep turning the page, which is what Ian Fleming kept stressing. He says, I don't really care about the content as long as the reader keeps turning the page. And I think there's a lot in that. The content will follow and the reader will absorb it so long as he's excited by it. And Fleming goes in great detail, actually, as to flavors, colors, smells, sounds. Everything's got to be dramatic to keep them going. It had to be a soldier because the world we're entering is not going to be the world. We're not going to win it through politics. We're not going to win it through lawyers like John Grisham's winning a case in some courthouse in Georgia. It's going to be bitter, brutal, and vicious. Wherever this world is going, I can guarantee, whichever way it ends up, the process is going to be bitter, brutal, and vicious. And we need a guy who, my idea is my hero is ready for that, and others have to be. And I wanted to tie it very much, if there was an event that triggered me into this, I have to say my Jamaican experience was a factor, the Roald Dahl factor, but my politics. But the critical breakthrough for me personally was about the age of 17. My dad, who was a very down-to-earth British gentleman, nothing special about him in many ways, but obviously special to me. He took me at 17, he insisted we go and see the World War I battlefields, which at 17 I had much better things on my bucket list than going around huge graveyards in the middle of boring parts of Belgium. But within a day or so, the impact, and I try and regurgitate this to an extent in the book, the impact is overwhelming, and it completely grounded me in a matter of hours in my roots, in my country, and sacrifice of others, so that I was, able to do what I was able to do, in a way that that no church service or teacher or film or anything else was ever going to do. And I highly recommend anyone who has a chance to visit them, especially if you've got connections with them, like your country fought there. And I felt a sense of real anger that their role has now largely been overlooked. You mentioned the poets. Now, if anyone learns anything about World War I history, it's through the more wimpy poets. It's the ones that sort of crying and weeping about suffering and pain. But that was just one small contingent of the poets. Many of them had other views, as did the other soldiers on the other side who went into the arts. And if they're not hearing it from the poets, they're hearing it from stupid TV shows like Blackadder, which I have a bitter resentment. I don't know if you know Blackadder, but they did a whole series. It's very famous in the UK. It's a comedy, and it ridicules all the soldiers. And Monty Python started it, actually, and it's ironic to see people like John Cleese now complaining that there are no heroes standing up for what remains of his country. Because,
well, he participated in its deconstruction, right?
Sorry about that. The dog just barked. Sorry, what did you say?
Okay. I said the irony is that Monty Python, John Cleese, who's complaining now, was a participant in its deconstruction several decades before.
A big player he was. Anyway, Blackadder is the one that everyone knows now. It's funny and you'll laugh your head off. But it's at the expense, all the laughter is at the expense of the people who were killed there. And they try and redeem themselves in the last minute of the last show. This is a TV show that went on for, I don't know, 20 episodes or something. In the last minute of the last show, they show them to be heroes. And it's a very famous scene. And everyone sort of clings to that as a kind of, oh, well, you know, they gave it a fair shot. But they forget the 20 episodes before that where they just whitewashed the whole thing and made them out to be really no better than idiots who were slaughtered for no reason, and sort of willing victims is the word, and they weren't victims. They knew what they were doing. Many of them were better educated, better skilled, more rounded, and much better people than we would find in any cross section of society today.
You're absolutely right.
I wanted to speak for them. That's what, and in so doing, if I may go on a little bit, I wanted to. You'll both be familiar with the foundation myth concept, where you have to. Successful societies grow from roots that they're all like common knowledge to everyone. The Jews have successfully done it in all sorts of areas, not least the Holocaust. Other societies used to do it through religion, and whatever the religion, that was the foundational myth, whether it was Allah or Jesus or whatever. But those, sadly, the Christ and the Christianity, have lost their cultural status. They're of Canterbury this week wanted to tear down all our statues in our churches, paint Jesus brown because he probably wasn't white. Anyway, you get it there. And so we're not. While it's still fundamentally important, our Christianity, to our success or failure in the future, it's not going to be easy, I don't think, to get vast numbers of young men to march into church and start singing hymns again. I don't think that's going to happen easily at all. But I do think, and we're seeing it already, that they are willing to stand up and fight for the statues of soldiers who were killed in the First World War. That happened literally 2 weeks ago. Football hooligans, they call them in the press, but they're just normal white kids from England or British kids. They want to protect these monuments, and they lined up in front of them and were prepared to fight. Maybe die in front of the mobs. They were much outnumbered, but they were willing to do it, and that I see as a route to establishing a new kind of foundational myth. I think, and one that's reasonable and accessible.
No, that's actually a very important topic that you're touching upon, and you've said some really, really important points. And this is one of the aspects that we're trying to contextualize in Imperium art, which we will discuss in a moment. I don't want to jump away too much, but please hold that thought, because I think we will be discussing this very, very shortly. So maybe I'll jump to the next question, and I think that these questions we can cover fairly quickly, although I might change it around a little bit. So before I ask, I'm going to ask you, why did you choose the era and locations? That I think that you kind of answered that question in a way, but
they had to be contemporary because it's a contemporary issues, and no one pick up a book now about in the Dickens era. They're just not going to do it. So it had to be modern. Also, I had the advantage of knowing about the modern world better than I did any other. I didn't have to do extra research. I brought in Rhodesia. Rhodesia is very symbolic. I don't know how familiar you are with it. It was the first. Yes. Post-war, Britain started. There were several wars in the colonies, insurrections in Kenya, in Malaya, and the Brits went out and fought for them. Even though they didn't have a big presence in those countries, you know, they were a tiny minority, but they fought to the death and won, and defeated the communist insurgencies in both countries, or the native insurgents. And that had been the pattern for the whole hundreds of years before. That's what the British did to maintain their empire. But Rhodesia, not only did they abandon the Rhodesians and say, you're on your own, we're not fighting, but they schemed to make sure that Rhodesia lost. They even threatened to send troops to fight the Rhodesians, except the troops refused point blank, saying, bugger that. But they wanted to. And it just shows, it was the moment where we, as a race, maybe as a civilization, I don't know, capitulated. And not only did we put our hands up, but we schemed with the enemy, if you like, in inverted commas. So I think Rhodesia is a magnificent sort of symbol of what was, and I try and introduce that for that.
Right. Your main character is originally from Rhodesia, and that's an important point to make for the audience. So again, a lot of interesting character developments, and again, highly recommend the book. So let's jump to the next question, which is, I think now we're closing in on the Imperium art topic. How do you view the symbolism of your main character's struggle with modernity?
Yes, well, I've purposely made him a man out of time. Rhodesia was considered a backward country in many ways, not advanced, not civilized, not sophisticated, and that was a part of the reason I made him Rhodesian. And I bring him to Europe at the age of about 20. And he's still a man out. He's trapped in this sort of backward mentality. I mean, you can call it back. Some people call it backward. Obviously, I wouldn't. It was a civilized and sophisticated mentality in my eyes. Mm-hmm. But that's where he found it difficult. Britain had been at war with his own country and schemed to make sure it lost. And yet, despite the fact that his ancestors would have fought for Britain, so it was a real tragedy in that sense for them. And he sees with the eyes of a naive. He's quite naive. He's meant to be. He didn't go to university. He hasn't had his brain pumped full of critical theory and all the other things. So he just sees things as they are, and he calls them as they are. And he does find the modern world to be obscene. Really, he doesn't understand it. He doesn't like it. There's no beauty. There's just madness. None of it makes sense. He finds his own niche within it eventually, and partly through women. The female characters are of the same mentality as him, so they help introduce. One of them helps him introduce him to kind of new how to protect and defend yourself or ride the tiger, I suppose is the term, isn't it? Within this craziness. And it's not the central theme of the book, but I tried whatever possible to slip in an extra line or two to sort of illustrate his frustration and disappointment. Disappointment, I think, is probably the biggest feeling we all feel. It's so unnecessary what we're going through. I'm so sad.
I share that feeling for sure.
Yeah, and I think, I'm sorry, did you want to add anything to it? I'm sorry.
Not really. His way of conquering, or my way of conquering it, is facing this challenge is similar. Well, I try to put it into the character. We have to be braver than we think we are, stronger than we think we are. We have to charge forward, sort of waving swords to the best of our ability, rather than shrinking from it, hiding from it, pretending it's going to go away, pretending it's just some kind of nonsense that will dissipate. It isn't. We have our backs to the wall, and we need to face up to it. If we don't, the price is going to be not just a heavy one; it's going to be the heaviest one.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think this perfectly ties into the last question that I have relating to your book, but also your general impressions on our ongoing topics related to Imperium art. So in my Imperium art essay, I wrote about the concepts of cognitive dominance and the dialectic of artistic violence and the warrior poet. So how would you place your main character within that conceptualization?
Yes, I was very conscious of that. I was actually going to use the line that his eyes were, you couldn't tell whether his eyes were the eyes of a warrior or a poet. But it didn't work in the end, so I dropped it. But I did keep the theme, and I used instead the cultured thug term. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Jonathan Bauer.
Yeah, that's great.
I think Jonathan Bowden was where I heard it. I think it's better for the novel than poet, and the poet thing a bit too esoteric. He's a cultured thug. He admits it in those terms. In his case, he was a thug first, and the culture was kind of forced on him, partly by his role as an agent. He had to learn certain aspects, upgrade his vocabulary, and learn things, to fit in and be a successful agent. But he was primarily a thug who and women also introduce him to sophistication, and so he becomes cultured. But he's really a thug. He scraped the paint off him, and he's a thug at heart. And his body reflects that. He's full of wounds and scars, yes. And again, I think that's where we need to be as people. It's no good being having an intellectual wing of our group and a bunch of thugs at the other end. We need to blend them, and we need to be able to fight on any battlefield, whether intellectual or physical, and we need to be ready to, now Britain used to be excellent at that, and the American people too. We were all rounders. We could chop wood one minute and quote Shakespeare the next. I had an ancestor that knew Shakespeare off by heart, apparently, and he was a soldier. I don't know if it's possible or feasible, but again, it's all about presenting ideals for people to follow if they can, if they want to.
All right, I think. Thank you so much. I mean, to be honest with you, I was hoping that we jump right into Imperium art, but I think that we're already there, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was gonna kind of take over from here just with a few questions, and I'm looking at the questions that we've kind of discussed before the show, and we've covered so much and a lot more than what I thought we would cover. And in so many different ways. You're just really good at explaining your book, your project, your concepts, your artistic world, and it's coming across beautifully. So this is just more reason for people to click the link below and download Richard's book on Kindle, for example. So how does your book trigger a political awakening in its readers?
You haven't reached the end yet, but there's a reveal, like in a Ayn Rand novel, at the end, which kind of, throughout the book, he's asking questions and he's confused and he knows where he stands, but he can't reconcile that with the world that he lives in. It's a mad, chaotic world. And I think we're all in that position to an extent, or have been. And I decided at an early age to try and understand, I set out to, that's what the whole book and my life has been really about. It's been my life's work to try and understand this phenomena that we're living through. And it's kind of revealed in 3 or 4 pages towards the end, where the bad guy spells out really why and how they're motivated, and how there is no, it's not politics. We're not dealing with a political phenomenon as such. It's a psychological phenomenon, and there is no cure. It's not resolvable. These psychological issues are very deep, and maybe 1 in 100 of them can be solved, perhaps. But most of them are hardcore, and we see it. We see that when you look at the reactions of the women screaming and stripping their clothes off at abortion rallies and whatever else, and the recent marches and stuff, we just see a kind of psychopathy at work. It's not to do with the original claimed reasons, and it's nothing. It's a deep-rooted psychological thing. Anyway, and
a cult type behavior. It's very cultish.
It's a cult and beyond.
Yes.
I think if there's a takeaway from it, first of all, is to understand that this is you can't compromise, you cannot negotiate, you cannot give them. Doesn't matter what you give them, it's not going to be enough. And once you've got that in your mind, the other side of it is, if that's the case, where to? What are we going to do? Because there really isn't. There's not many options left. If your enemy is resolute and determined and never going to change and never going to stop, you have to start girding your loins and start thinking of plan B, because until now it's always been a case of, well, let's give them this, let's give them that, let's compromise here, let's whitewash that painting.
Certainly.
And I'm hoping that they come away with from the book with a new understanding of the stakes of this game, and the stakes are everything. Everything is in the middle of the table, and it's winner take all.
Well said. Very, very well said. Earlier we had a discussion about hero mythology, and I believe you did touch on that a bit with kind of bringing up James Bond and that masculine myth. I'm kind of wondering if you could just do a little commentary on your thoughts on hero mythology and how it plays a role in your writing.
Well, you could almost say that I wrote the book in order to present a hero. I think Ayn Rand used those words. She only wrote really to present heroes. There's something very satisfying in presenting a hero, inventing one, and personifying him, giving him whatever clothes he's wearing. It's a joy to do as a writer, and there's certainly a lot of pleasure. That's one of the reasons, but also it comes back to filling a gap. I think we need heroes. If we don't provide them, the enemy will, and the enemy has. And
yeah, certainly. That actually leads really well to another kind of question, and we generally ask this question of everyone that's on the show and in our sphere, and that is, what are your thoughts on developing our own platforms and markets? Do you have any kind of insights or unique ideas on that?
Well, I think that we're up against it. It's almost, this book, I haven't discussed it with you, but it took more than 10 years to publish. It was finished in 2007 or something. Once it got published, I was doxxed, and the publisher dropped it after a year and a half, so it never really got anywhere. There were no grounds. The doxing was totally innocuous and stupid, but they were so panicky ridden that they thought the safety to drop it. So I've only just now republished it. I'm publishing it myself.
You're self-publishing, is that correct?
This time, yeah, because I can't be bothered to go through the whole. And with the publishers, it was a nightmare. I mean, one guy approved it. He was the top guy at one of the top companies in London. He approved it in 2005, but he took it to his board, and they all said no, it's too politically incorrect. So that's after that. I put it on the shelf for 10 years, and it wasn't until 3 years ago I got it out again. But yeah, so that's illustrative of the nonsense we have to go through. It doesn't matter how good your book is or how good your product is. You're not going to get it published as things stand through the official channels. In fact, you may not even get it through social media because they're closing that down now. But
yeah, go ahead.
Well, so we have to. It's guerrillas. It's the guerrilla war, I'm afraid, for now. And to build our own platforms, but obviously not everyone's got the resources or abilities to do that.
It seems like there's two approaches. One is, like you say, build your own platforms, or make your work kind of implicit, esoteric, and kind of hide your messages in there. I suppose both are okay. I don't I feel like I blame these kind of, oh, the middleman, the publishers that give in to the threats.
Yeah.
And it seems like we just need to have maybe some kind of security or protection for those publishers so that they can't be bullied into refusing people like us. That's another approach.
Maybe.
But
I will stress that I do think the secret to our success is the implicit, make it a good product, a good artwork, and the message has to fit the formula of a good artwork. So there's no point in sort of shouty.
No, preaching and all that.
Yeah. My book suffered from that early on. I had to rejig it many times to get what the more smooth product it is. Now it's easy to read. But we are in the same position, I think, that communists were in the 50s in America, where there was trials against them and laws about what could be in a Hollywood film and stuff. And they got around it. I mean, films like High Noon is a brilliant film. It's apparently written by communists for communists and meant to show how communists can win. But, it works as a great Western, and the message was somehow in there. And we somehow are in that similar position where it's no point in making shouty stuff. It's got to fit.
Yeah. Well, that actually leads smoothly into my next question. How does the fictional novel work well as a medium for awakening our people and inspiring them?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical. I chose it for a very definite reason, apart from the fact I can't sing or dance or anything else. But a novel, first of all, it's direct from the mind of the creator, and it's unexpurgated in that sense. It's his work and his stamp on it. Now, even a film or a documentary goes through producers and editors and stuff, and it can be dramatically altered. A book tends to be pretty direct from the author's mind, and therefore the chances are it's less likely to be polluted and corrupted. But also, of course, a book can have pages where a lot of heavy information is downloaded into the reader, which he would never download in any other context. He's not going to get it from a pop song or a picture or a sculpture, nor is he going to get it, most people, from a blog even, or an article. Articles, they come, they go. You read them and maybe remember one or two pieces, but they're gone. And 3 years later, you would never remember the magazine, let alone the article. A book sits on your shelf. You can present it to your friend, pass it around. It's tangible. It carries it can carry as much information as you want. So I do think the focus, we need more writers. We need people out there writing good novels that are exciting and easy to read and appeal to the reader, even if there wasn't a message.
That's amazing, because once again, you're smoothly leading me right into my next question.
Before you jump into the next question, I just wanted to make a few comments here, because I think that Richard touched upon some really, really important points. Excuse me. So we don't have really large or any kind of significant publishing houses, and the publishing house is predominantly there for marketing purposes, to market the book or the novel or what have you.
Yeah.
And we don't have that capability right now. Or in other words, we're sort of hampered by the decisions of the editorial board there, who are more and more against us. So I think that for us, independent editors are important. If you do write a novel, the biggest problem I see, and Richard, in your case, I cannot say that this is the case because it's very well written, but in many cases, I would say that what we lack is a professional editing element to the process of getting the book out. You want to have someone look at what you're writing and check for grammatical errors, logical errors, plot, all these important aspects to make sure that the story is tight, to make sure that the story is good, and it flows well. Because if we don't have that element, then we're then at a disadvantage of producing, because our goal has to be to produce high quality. We have to always strive toward high quality product.
I'll say something on that. I think it has to be higher than high, because the critics are out for you from day one. I mean, if you fit the right gender and racial and sexual whatever, they'll usher your book through to the red carpet in days, and you'll get paid millions of pounds. And every critic will fall over backwards trying to praise it. But someone, doing what we're doing, they're going to be out for you from the start. So it has to be way better than any normal novel has to be.
Exactly.
Which does up the challenge, but we will never have the editors and stuff, or if we do, it will be at a stage in the history of the world where we've won, if you like, and things are back to normal. And the need won't be so necessary then, because we will have won. We need to do these things ourselves. I had to sadly rewrite my book endless times, edit it myself. There was no, and in truth, not even the publishers nowadays. They're so laid back, and they know who's going to sell and who's not, because it's already been preordained, and they don't care about editing anymore. It's a common theme in writing. If you tick the boxes, you're through, and who cares? They'll check for commas, but that's about it. But if you don't tick the boxes, there's no way you're going to get published. So it's sad, but we have to do it all ourselves. I mean, in that sense, I'll be very happy to lend my limited skills to anyone who wants me to look at their work.
I really have to jump in right here, because my next question was really about what advice would you give to young writers, new writers, and this is in light of this show and what we're doing with Imperium Art. In many ways, it's really for the future. It's for a future generation, and certainly for people now that are striving towards our well-being and our freedom and solving our political problems. But what kind of advice would you give to young writers that are aspiring to create novels like yours?
Well, it's all the old simple formulas of hard work, perseverance, don't give up. If I'd been of that mentality, I'd have given up 20 years ago, I'm sure. It can be done. The great thing about writing is anyone can write a good sentence, one good sentence. Anyone can do it now. You could write a good sentence. It might take you an hour, but you'll come up with a decent sentence. Now, a book is just thousands of those in a row, and it can be done. As opposed to, say, singing or playing the piano. Not everyone. You can teach me one or two notes, but I can't extrapolate that into a symphony.
Well, with a few drinks, you could probably do it.
But writing, anyone technically can do, and it does take time, and it's a lot of pain, but it is very satisfying. And all I'd say is, should keep going. Maybe get some friends to read it, to give you feedback.
Well, in closing, this is kind of off the cuff here. We had a really great conversation the other day, and one of the things that you left me with is that you said that, don't worry, we're going to win. And I was so moved by that, and that's really going to stay with me. I mean, I do actually deeply believe that in my heart. I know that, but I just feel I would like to win sooner than later, and end all the suffering and problems that we're experiencing. Yeah. But what makes you feel that way? What gives you that?
I didn't put a time limit on it, did I? I said it. No one really knows the time.
You didn't give a time scale. Next Tuesday at 5:00. Okay.
But we will win for a variety of reasons. One is we are the producers, we are the soldiers, we are the intellects, the engineers, as a rule. We are of that ilk. We're not the arts graduates or the professional revolutionaries and activists with really no... We're the perfect fourth generation warriors in many ways, and this is a fourth generation war.
Beautifully said. Yeah. A lot of people don't know what 4G warfare is, and it's kind of the most contemporary style of warfare, which is in many ways like information war. It's a subversive war. It's not one in which there is a battlefield like World War I. Rather that the enemy has infiltrated our media, our academics, big pharmaceuticals, all these aspects. It's kind of a corruption. But yeah, and so it's an idea war in many ways. But go on.
Yes, another dimension is we are fighting for our turf. We're fighting our land, our roots, our blood, our families. They often don't even have families. They're just out there, in a town that they didn't really grow up in or anything. They just happened to have moved there. It's a very different type of animal that we're up against to us. And traditionally, people on the home territory tend to know it better, know how to exploit it better, know how to and fight more bitterly for it. I mean, I think we will see mass population movements very soon once it becomes clear that it's not going to be the easy win that they want, and there are going to be big casualties, and people are going to rethink: do I really need to be here when I could be back in wherever it is with my family that've been there for generations, speaking the language of my parents and so on. I don't think it will be a Stalingrad situation. I think there'll be an upfront confrontation, and pretty soon after that, the understanding will spread automatically that it's not going to be as easy. It's not. The thing is, we've never stood an inch of ground, defended an inch of our ground so far, and it's been 150 years or something since it started. This movement, and they're used to just walking forwards and us giving ground and compromising. But the moment they don't, it's going to be a different world, and I think that day's coming. I mean, we've seen the videos today on YouTube, women, Karens or whatever you want to call them, in their family Winnebago or whatever it is, pulling out handguns like a professional SWAT team and threatening to kill anyone who takes another step. And that's new. That's different.
Oh yeah, that talk about the new normal. There you go. That was a little twist of a phrase there. Nullis, did you want to cap anything off here before we close the show out?
No, I actually just wanted to say that I genuinely appreciated this conversation. I highly recommend, and I can't stress it enough, I highly recommend reading this book, the novel. And I thank you very much, Richard, for spending time with us today.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, guys, and thank you very much for having me.
But once again, the link below to Lost Causes by Richard Nichols. Definitely click it. Go to Amazon and get your copy. Thanks again, Richard. It's been such a pleasure, and we wish you well. Everybody have a great night.
And you guys. Thanks.
Thanks.